Mark Patterson had always believed that the quiet moments of a marriage said more than the loud ones. It was in the soft morning hellos, the gentle smiles across the dinner table, and the silent understanding in the car rides home. After 12 years with Emily, he thought he knew every shade of her happiness and every shadow of her sadness. But lately, something felt different. Not broken, not painful, just different. Like a familiar song played slightly out of tune. Most people wouldn't notice, but Mark did. He noticed everything when it came to her. It began, oddly enough, with a simple smile. Not his, not hers. A smile she gave someone else, and that was the moment his heart learned, for the first time, what quiet fear felt like. On a chilly Thursday evening, with the wind brushing softly against the windows, Mark found himself driving across the city with a warm bag of takeout resting in the passenger seat. Emily had been working late again, and he wanted to surprise her. They hadn't spent much time together lately, her schedule overflowing with meetings, deadlines, and the pressure of being someone everyone depended on. He missed her. Not in the dramatic, lonely kind of way, just in that aching, everyday way people do when life grows too loud and loving. Someone becomes something managed between responsibilities. In the early years of their marriage, surprise dinners were common. They were spontaneous, full of laughter, inside jokes, and the kind of warmth that made a tiny apartment feel like the whole world. But over the years, routines settled in. Schedules took over, and those little surprises faded into memory. Tonight felt like a chance to bring one back as he pulled into the parking lot of her office building. He rehearsed the moment in his mind, how she'd light up the way she always used to, how she'd say, "You remembered my favorite," how the room would brighten with her smile, the one that always made him forget every worry. He carried that hope with him as he stepped inside. The office was mostly quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists after hours. Lights were dimmed, computer screens sleeping, papers untouched. The hum of a vending machine echoed faintly through the hallway. But when Mark reached the doorway to Emily's department, he stopped. There she was, leaning casually against her desk, shoulders relaxed, her face glowing under the warm office lights. She was laughing softly, freely, in a way he hadn't heard in weeks. Standing across from her was a coworker he recognized from a few company events. Ryan Morrison, the friendly, easygoing guy with the kind smile. It wasn't the fact that she was talking to another man that struck Mark. Emily had coworkers, friends, people in her life he was never bothered by. It was the way she looked at him, focused, warm, as though the rest of the world had disappeared. Mark stood there silently, frozen for a moment with the takeout bag still in his hand. He watched Emily tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear while she listened to Ryan speak. He noticed the way her smile widened at something he said. A small, gentle smile. One he hadn't seen directed at him lately. A strange heaviness settled in Mark's chest, subtle, quiet, but unmistakable. He tried to shake it off. He told himself he was imagining things. He reminded himself that Emily was kind to everyone. Yet he couldn't deny the truth. That smile wasn't one she gave easily. It was one she saved for rare moments. Moments she used to save for him. When she finally noticed him standing there, the transformation was instant. The warmth in her eyes dimmed into polite surprise. Her posture straightened. The laughter softened into something more controlled. "Mark, what are you doing here?" she asked, startled, but trying to sound cheerful. Ryan glanced between them, offering a friendly nod. "Hey man, Emily didn't mention you were stopping by." Mark forced a smile. "I wanted to bring dinner. Thought you might be hungry?" Emily's eyes flickered something between appreciation and discomfort. She walked toward him, smoothing the tension with a quick, practice smile. "That's really sweet," she said, taking the bag from his hand. "Thank you." But the moment lingered in the room, heavy and unspoken. The kind of moment where words don't explain anything, yet somehow reveal everything. Mark felt it. Emily felt it. Even Ryan, quietly stepping back toward his desk, must have felt it. As they left the office together, Mark kept replaying the scene in his mind. Her laughter, her expression, the way she seemed caught in a different world, one he wasn't part of. He wanted to ask about it. He wanted to tell her what he saw, what he felt, what frightened him. But instead, he walked beside her in silence, letting the cool night air fill the space. Between them, that silence said more than either of them was ready to admit. Because sometimes, the deepest stories begin not with loud confessions, but with the quiet realization that something precious might be slipping away. And Mark knew without understanding why that tonight was the beginning of something. He could no longer ignore Dot on the drive home that evening. Mark found himself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. Emily sat beside him, quiet, her eyes fixed on the passing streetlights. They flickered across her face like pieces of memories, some bright, some dimming, all drifting somewhere between their past and the unspoken tension between them now. Mark wanted to speak. More than anything, he wanted to reach across the console, take her hand, and ask, "Are you still happy with me?" But the words felt too heavy, too final. Like a question that, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. Instead, he let silence settle between them. And in that silence, his mind wandered to the beginning of their story. Long before dinners went cold and smiles changed meanings. They met during their senior year of college, two people with nothing in common except a shared class and the same worn-out library table they both preferred. Emily had been the bright one, always full of warm energy, always ready with a kind word. Mark had been quieter, thoughtful, the type who listened more than he spoke. The first time she sat across from him, she apologized for disturbing him. He had simply smiled and told her she wasn't disturbing anything. What he didn't tell her was that her presence made the cold library feel warm for the first time. Weeks passed, and their shared table became something unspoken but understood. She'd arrive with a coffee for herself and eventually, one for him too. At first, she brought him whatever the cafe recommended. Later, she brought him his favorite without asking. Somewhere between those two stages, their lives began to overlap. One rainy afternoon, she showed up with her hair damp, strands sticking to her cheek. She sat down, opened her books, and sighed dramatically. "It's been a horrible day," she declared. Mark looked up from his notes. "Want to talk about it?" She hesitated, then smiled a small, grateful smile he would remember for years. "I do. And I don't know why, but I feel like you'll actually listen." And he did, for 2 hours. Without looking at the clock once, he didn't know then that listening would become one of the ways he loved her. He didn't know that, remembering the little things, her favorite coffee, the way she wrinkled her nose when she concentrated, the books she reread whenever she was anxious would become second nature to him. He only knew, even then, that being near her made him feel more alive than anything else he had known. The memories were gentle but painful now, like touching something fragile that used to be whole. As they pulled into the driveway, Emily looked at the house the way someone looks at a memory they aren't sure they recognize anymore. Their small porch light flickered, waiting for them like it always did. "Do you remember when we first moved here?" Mark asked softly, surprising himself. Emily looked at him, startled by the sudden sound of his voice. "Of course I do. We painted the living room the wrong color." "We painted it 3 times, he corrected, a small smile tugging at his lips. She laughed a real laugh, warm and familiar. "Because someone insisted the shade was too bright, then too dull, then not the green I imagined. That someone had no idea what he was doing." Mark admitted he also had paint in his hair for 2 days. "'Kay, and you still married him after that?" "I did," she said quietly, the softness in her voice holding more meaning than the words themselves. For a moment, the tension between them loosened. They stood in the entryway of their home, surrounded by echoes of the life they'd built, photos lining the hallway, books they'd read together, the coat rack they bought during a road trip just because Emily thought it would feel like home. Everything felt familiar. Everything felt distant. Both truths lived side by side. Later that night, after Emily went to bed, Mark stayed awake in the living room. He sat in the dim lamplight, holding a framed photo from their first anniversary. Emily was leaning into him, her eyes bright with love and something even deeper trust, certainty, a sense of belonging. He stared at her past expression and wondered quietly, when did I stop being the one she leaned toward? He wasn't angry at her. He wasn't angry at Ryan. He was angry at the slow drift. He hadn't noticed soon enough the little moments they let pass without attention, the smiles they stopped sharing, the conversations they postponed for later. A later that never came. Their love hadn't broken. It had faded around the edges like a photograph left in the sun too long. And now, seeing the glow she once carried for him shine somewhere else, however innocent. In a way he didn't know how to explain, as he traced the edge of the frame, he whispered the question he hadn't dared ask her. What happened to us? The house didn't answer. Only his own heart did quietly. The next morning arrived quietly, but the silence between Mark and Emily felt louder than the birds outside their window. They moved around each other gently, like two people afraid of stepping on something delicate, something that could break with the slightest pressure. Emily left for work earlier than usual. She kissed Mark on the cheek before walking out the door, but the touch felt light, almost hesitant, like she wasn't sure whether the gesture still belonged between them. Mark stood there for a long moment after she left, staring at the spot where she had just stood. He wanted to believe it was just stress, her workload, their distance, the slow erosion of time. But something else lingered. Something he couldn't understand, yet couldn't ignore. The memory of that smile she gave Ryan still hovered over him like a shadow. Still. Mark tried to shake it off. He had work to do, a day to get through, a life to keep living. So he made coffee, grabbed his jacket, and headed out. But fate has a strange way of nudging people at the exact moment they're trying to hold themselves together. At lunchtime, Mark stopped by a small cafe he hadn't visited in years. It wasn't intentional, just a coincidence of traffic, an open parking spot, and a quiet desire for a break. The place looked the same as it did a decade ago. Warm lights, old wooden tables, handwritten chalkboard menus. This was where he and Emily used to meet when they first got their jobs. Every Friday, they'd sit by the window, share a slice of pie, and talk about their dreams. The memory hit him unexpectedly, washing over him with a bittersweet ache. Just as he sat down with his order, a soft voice called his name. Mark. He looked up. Standing near his table was Laura Bennett, an old friend they hadn't seen in almost 5 years. Laura had been one of the few people who knew him and Emily from their early dating days, one of the witnesses to their quiet, gentle beginning. Her expression was warm, familiar, like someone who hadn't forgotten the version of him that existed before the years piled on. Laura. Wow, it's been so long, Mark said, genuinely surprised. She smiled and motioned toward the chair across from him. Mind if I sit? Please. It's good to see you. She sat down, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I almost didn't recognize you at first. But then again, you never change much, she joked lightly. Mark laughed, a small, real laugh he hadn't felt in days. Trust me, I've changed. Laura studied him for a moment, her expression softening. You look tired. Is everything okay? That simple question, gentle, honest, hit deeper than it should have. Mark hesitated. Not because he didn't want to talk, but because he didn't want to admit how much weight he'd been carrying. Yet something about Laura's presence, calm, familiar, untouched by the tension at home, made it easier to speak. It's just been a long few weeks, he said quietly. She nodded with understanding, the kind that didn't need explanations. Marriage does that sometimes. Even the strongest relationships go through storms. Her words struck him in a way he didn't expect. Yeah, he murmured. I guess we're in one right now. Laura didn't pry. She didn't ask for details. She only offered something Mark hadn't felt in a while: compassion without judgment. And then fate delivered the twist Mark didn't see coming as he and Laura continued talking, catching up on life, laughter, old memories. Mark noticed something out of the corner of his eye. Emily Dot, she stood near the cafe entrance, frozen in place, holding a paper bag of takeout. Her eyes weren't angry and they weren't shocked. They were something else, something unreadable, something like hurt. Mark's breath caught. She hadn't come here for him. She hadn't expected to see him. She had simply walked into the same cafe from their past. At the exact moment he was sitting with another woman, for a beat. Everything stopped. Laura turned, recognizing Emily instantly. "Oh, Emily. Hi." Emily forced a small smile and stepped closer. "Hi, Laura. It's been a long time." Her voice was calm, polite, but her eyes flickered to Mark. Full of questions she didn't say aloud. Mark stood up. "Emily, it's fine," she interrupted gently. "I was just picking up lunch." But the look in her eyes told him it wasn't fine. Not even close. "Would you like to join us?" Laura offered, her tone kind but unaware of the storm brewing under the surface. Emily hesitated. Too long enough for the silence to say what she didn't know. "I should get back," she finally said, holding the takeout bag a little too tightly. "Have a good lunch." She gave a polite nod, then walked out quickly. The bell above the door chiming softly behind her. Mark felt the room tilt slightly, as if the twist of the moment had shifted something deep in the ground beneath them. Laura looked at him, concern in her eyes. "I didn't mean to cause anything." "You didn't," Mark said, though his chest ached with the weight of the truth. "It was just bad timing." But deep down, he wondered if it was really coincidence or fate holding up a mirror, showing them both the cracks they'd been avoiding. Emily had seen Mark through the same lens he had seen her the night before, laughing with someone else, sharing a moment that wasn't meant to hurt but somehow did. And fate, it seemed, was not done with them yet, because sometimes the smallest twist, a shared cafe, an unexpected meeting, can reignite feelings long ignored, or reveal the feelings quietly slipping away. That evening, the house felt different. Not louder, not colder, just different. As if every wall had learned a new secret and wasn't sure how to hold it. Emily arrived home earlier than usual. Mark heard her keys on the counter, the soft rustle of her jacket being hung up. The quiet pause she took before walking into the living room. That pause alone told Mark she was unsure, hurting and unsure. He closed his laptop and looked up just as she stepped into the doorway. Neither of them spoke. The silence stood between them like a fragile glass wall, thin enough to see through, but too delicate to touch. Finally, Emily broke the quiet with a careful breath. "I didn't expect to see you there today," she said, her voice steady but gentle, as if choosing each word with care. "I know," Mark replied. "I didn't expect to run into you either." Emily nodded, though the motion looked more like a habit than understanding. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped together tightly, for a long moment. Neither spoke that the hurt beneath her stillness. Emily had always carried her emotions quietly, like someone who didn't want to burden the world with her sadness. But tonight, she couldn't hide it. Her posture was too straight, her breathing too controlled, and her eyes. They avoided his the way people avoid a truth they aren't prepared to face. "Laura and I were just catching up," Mark said softly, as though offering a gentle explanation before she even asked. "I know," she murmured. "She's nice." But her voice wavered on the last word, not with jealousy, not with anger, but with something softer, deeper, something like fear. Mark swallowed. He hadn't meant to hurt her. He hadn't even known she would be there. But what he felt in that cafe, her shocked eyes, the subtle pain, the way she turned away too quickly, had stayed with him all day. "Emily, what did you think when you saw us?" he asked, not accusingly, but with genuine concern, almost afraid to hear the answer. She looked down at her hands. "I thought." Her voice trailed off before she could finish, but the silence completed the sentence. He already understood. She thought he no longer needed her the way he once did. And that realization sat in the space between them, heavy and tender at the same time. Mark's quiet confession. Mark shifted forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Emily, I need you to know something, he began, searching for words he had kept buried. I haven't felt like myself lately, and I haven't known how to talk about it. Emily finally lifted her eyes, surprised. You haven't? He shook his head. No, I've been trying to ignore the distance between us, hoping it would fix itself. But seeing you with Ryan, it made me realize how long I've been pretending everything is fine. Her expression softened, sad, but open. Mark, I didn't mean for any of it to make you feel pushed aside. I know, he replied quickly. I really do. And I'm not angry with you, Emily. I'm just scared. That admission landed gently, but it carried the weight of years. Mark wasn't someone who used the word scared. Not because he wanted to seem strong, but because he rarely felt anything close to fear. But losing her. That fear lived quietly in him now, constant and real. Emily's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. Scared of what? That you're slipping away, Mark whispered. Not because of him, just because life got busy and I didn't hold on tightly enough. Emily's unspoken hurt's falling. Just shimmering with the weight of emotion, carefully held back. Mark, when I saw you today, she said quietly, for a moment, I thought maybe you were happier talking to someone else too. His heart tightened. Emily, she shook her head gently. I know that sounds unfair. I know you weren't doing anything wrong. But it made me realize how easily two people can misunderstand each other, even after years of being close. Her voice cracked a little, though still soft. I never wanted you to think that I don't love you. Mark's breath stilled. Not because he doubted her feelings, but because he heard something in her voice he hadn't heard in months. Vulnerability. Real, trembling vulnerability. I've been overwhelmed, she admitted, pressing her hands together tightly. Work has taken pieces of me I didn't mean to give away. And instead of talking to you about how tired I felt, I tried acting like I was fine, so you leaned on someone else. Mark asked gently, not accusing, just trying to. Morning arrived quietly, as if the world itself feared making too much noise around the two of them. Adrian barely slept. He had spent most of the night replaying Elena's expression, those eyes filled with unsaid words. The kind that stayed with a person long after the moment passed. He sat in his small living room, staring at the soft lights slipping through the curtains. The sunrise felt different today. Brighter, or maybe heavier. He wasn't sure. What he was sure of was that something between them had shifted the night before. Even though nothing was spoken, it was a strange thing. How silence could speak louder than anyone expected. Adrian kept glancing at his phone, though he wasn't waiting for a message. Elena didn't send him messages early in the morning, not ever. Their friendship had always followed certain unspoken rules. Respect, distance, caution. But today those invisible boundaries felt thin. As if they were made of something fragile, he stood and paced the room. He had never been the kind of man who struggled to understand his own heart, but Elena had always been the exception. She was the one part of his life he never touched too closely because he feared what might happen if he did. Loving her even quietly, privately felt like balancing on a thin line over a place he might never recover from. And yet, she was also the one person who brought warmth into his cold days without even trying. That truth pressed heavily on him now. Elena, on the other side of the city, wasn't resting either. She sat on her balcony, wrapped in a soft blanket, holding a mug of tea she'd forgotten to drink. The morning breeze carried the faint scent of rain. And she closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Adrian had stood so close the night before. Close enough that she felt the warmth of his presence. Close enough that she had to remind herself to breathe steadily. But it wasn't the closeness that unsettled her, it was the emotion behind it. She had seen something in his eyes, something raw and unguarded, something she had been afraid to see for years. She had kept her feelings buried under polite smiles and careful conversation. She told herself it was better this way. He deserved someone certain, someone bold, someone who didn't hesitate the way she always did. She feared losing him more than she feared never having him at all. But last night, She felt something crack open inside her. The truth didn't stay quiet forever. It simply waited for the right moment. She pressed a hand over her heart, steadying herself. She had made peace with many things in life's disappointment. Delayed dreams, loneliness that sometimes visited without warning. But she had never made peace with the way Adrian made her feel. And she didn't know if she ever could. By noon, Adrian made a decision, one he never imagined he would be brave enough to make. He grabbed his keys and left the house, not giving himself time to reconsider. The drive to Elena's apartment felt longer than usual, each red light tugging at his nerves. He didn't have a script. He didn't have a plan. He only had a truth that refused to stay buried any longer. When he reached her building, he hesitated only once before he buzzed her apartment. His heart pounded in a steady, heavy rhythm. "Adrian?" Her voice floated through the intercom, soft and surprised. "Yeah, it's me. Can we talk?" There was a pause, a long, telling pause. Then her voice again, gentle, unsure. "Come up." He walked to her door with steps that felt both confident and afraid. When she opened it, he knew instantly that she, too, had barely slept. Her eyes gave it away, but she still looked like the calm he had been searching for all morning. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." They stood there, facing each other in the small entryway. The silence wasn't empty, was full, charged with every unspoken feeling they had carried for years. Elena stepped aside to let him in. He entered quietly, his breath unsteady from the weight of what he was about to say. The air in the room felt fragile, as if a single wrong word might shatter something delicate. She turned to him after closing the door, wringing her hands nervously. "Is everything okay?" "No," he said honestly. "Actually, nothing feels okay right now." Her eyes widened slightly, worry blooming across her face. "Adrian, what's wrong?" He took a slow breath. "Last night, something changed, and I can't pretend it didn't." Elena's lips parted. Her voice came out in a whisper. "I felt it too." Those 4 words almost broke him. He stepped closer, not too close, but close enough to show he wasn't hiding anymore. "Elena, I need to tell you something. I should have said it years ago, but I was afraid of what it might do to us." She swallowed, her eyes shining with emotion. "Tell me." He hesitated for just a moment, then finally let the truth cross the fragile line between them. "I care about you. More than I should. More than I ever meant to." The words hung in the air like a quiet storm, gentle, but powerful enough to change everything. Elena's breath caught. Her hand tightened around the edge of her sweater. She didn't speak right away, but she didn't step back either. For the first time in years, the truth was no longer silent. It was standing between them, clear, undeniable, and impossible to turn away from. Adrian had expected many possible reactions: shock, confusion, silence, perhaps even a gentle refusal. But the one thing he had never prepared for was the look on Elena's face now. She wasn't startled. She wasn't lost. She simply looked relieved, as if she had been holding her breath for years. The room around them seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet hum of truth finally spoken aloud. Elena pressed a trembling hand to her heart, steadying herself. Her voice, when it came, carried the weight of every unspoken emotion she had carried. "Adrian," she whispered, "I've cared for you too, more than I ever allowed myself to admit." The words washed over him slowly, like the tide returning after a long winter. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply absorbed them, letting each syllable settle where fear had lived for too long. But Elena wasn't finished. "I didn't want to ruin what we already had," she said softly. "Our friendship, the ease between us, the way you've always been part of my life. I thought saying anything would only complicate it." Adrian let out a quiet breath. "I thought the same." They both laughed, then not loudly, but with a soft, almost shy disbelief. A laugh that came from finally realizing how much time had done and been lost because they were trying so hard to protect something neither of them had ever been in danger of losing. Elena walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Her voice was calm, almost tender. All this time, I kept telling myself that what I felt wasn't real, that it was just comfort, familiarity, maybe even loneliness. She shook her head slowly. But it wasn't. It was you. Adrian joined her by the window, standing at a respectful distance. So what do we do now? It was an honest question, gentle, vulnerable, uncertain. The kind of question that didn't demand a perfect answer. Alina turned to him. We start small. We take things slowly. And we don't run from the truth anymore. Something warm spread through his chest at her words, a warmth that steadied him. But even then, he felt the need to be fair, to give space to every emotion swirling inside both of them. Alina, we don't have to rush into anything, he said quietly. We've waited this long. We can take our time. I just needed you to know how I feel. I couldn't keep carrying it in silence. Her eyes softened. I'm glad you told me. Truly. She hesitated, then added, I don't want to lose what we have. But I also don't want to keep pretending there's nothing deeper between us. His chest tightened with something like hope. For a while, they simply stood there in comfortable, quiet, and new kind of silence, gentle and warm instead of heavy. Outside, the world carried on, unaware that two lives had quietly shifted. The weeks that followed unfolded naturally. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, no rushed decisions. Instead, Adrian and Alina moved through familiar routines with a newfound honesty between them. They talked more openly. Now about small things. About memories. About the fears they had never dared to name before. They still laughed the way they always had. Still trusted each other the way they always did. But now there was something else woven between the words, possibility. They met for coffee more often, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting quietly without needing to fill every moment. Their conversations carried a new tenderness, a new care. Every day, the weight they once carried separately seemed to lighten. One afternoon, they walked through the small park near Elena's apartment. The sun was warm, the air gentle. Children played on the swings, dogs chased scattered leaves, and everything around them felt reassuringly ordinary. Alina paused beside a bench and looked at him. Her expression thoughtful. You know, she said softly, if someone had told me years ago that we'd end up here, I probably wouldn't have believed them. Adrian smiled. I might have believed it. I just didn't think I'd ever say anything. She nudged his shoulder lightly. Well, I'm glad you finally did. He looked at her with quiet affection, the kind that grew slowly, carefully over time. Me too. Alina took a small breath, gathering courage. So, where does this lead? Her question wasn't demanding. It wasn't even fearful. It was hopeful. Adrian didn't rush his answer. He took a moment to truly consider it. I think, he said gently, it leads wherever we choose to take it. She smiled, a soft, warm smile that reached her eyes. Good, because I'd like to see where this goes. And for the first time in years, the tension between them wasn't built on longing or hesitation. It was built on shared hope. Their relationship